David and I are going to talk about what we think is one of those opportunity areas in supply chain. There's not many, but it's one of those opportunity areas that you need to look at in terms of an area that could give you considerable competitive advantage against the people that you're in the market with. And how? Through reducing inventory and through improving your customer service. So, that's David and I. We're doing this in tandem because we've been working together within Scala on some demand-driven projects. And our background is reasonably complementary. I'm effectively an operator. So I did 20 years within Cadbury, then became Kraft, then became Mondelez. In that time, I did work with Scala as a customer of Scala within the best practice groups. And I think a number in the room, and certainly a number today, will have had experience of Scala in that context. David is, I would describe David as a deliverer. And David, his background is very strongly in project management and project delivery. So hence we've been working together in the demand-driven area. I'm going to be talking just briefly on why demand-driven and just talking to you about the concepts and the processes of demand-driven. David's going to spend more time then talking about the how. So in the 30 minutes, we'll seek to cover the why, and we'll seek to give you a little bit more understanding of how that actually operates in what is a sort of multidisciplinary, multi-business approach, really. This does work across both the manufacturing and the retail environment. There's not many environments that we're finding where this doesn't work. So I think for anybody, any of you sitting down here, you can effectively say this will work in your environment. Backing up the methodology is an institute called the Demand Driven Institute. Do look them up on the web. They've been working in terms of the concepts and the processes for at least 10 years now, but very much in the last 6 years, those processes have become fully refined and actually now adopted by many of the early adopters of demand-driven. In terms of benefits, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but certainly in the projects that we're now involved, we are seeing, at this stage, we are seeing improvements in inventory of over 30%, and we're also seeing improvements in significant improvements in customer service. That does vary depending on the environment. We'll talk a bit about how that might vary and how some of the type of businesses vary some of that. But generally, 30% plus inventory savings are possible through demand-driven. So why is that? Well, I think this is sort of one of the truths really in terms of really demand is fairly straightforward. Certainly this is a product without a lot of seasonality, point of sale in terms of the demand as it comes in, and it's very flat. You overlay that into the type of business that I suspect most of you are working in, and you suddenly find that actually the shipments of that product become complex because of a number of reasons and many spikes and troughs, and I guarantee that was certainly my experience in my business, that there are a lot of drivers that sort of create that complexity and that difference between what the customer is actually buying and what you're actually delivering into the store. You overlay then on top of that the production cycle, and you've got, in effect, very inefficient supply chains. And that, unfortunately, is the truth of most of the supply chains that operate anywhere around the globe. And that is what drives, in many senses, the extra costs. So costs in terms of expediting, costs in terms of getting people to sort of understand forecasting. And there's a number of areas within demand-driven that, within the whole forecast cycle, which create complexity and cost. What's the cause of that? And this really is the significant truth of the demand-driven process. So it's called by the Demand-Driven Institute by something called the bullwhip effect. It's due to the way that we pick up customer forecast and we drive that back up the supply chain. So very much our ERP systems, whichever ERP system you're using, is built from the concepts of MRP, and that is picking up a defined forecast and moving that back up the supply chain in a very linear fashion. And as it moves that forecast back, based on bill of materials, it's expanding the error as it moves it back up the supply chain. And that truth is a very important truth when you're looking at and we'll look at in a minute, in terms of how the demand-driven processes work very differently. So errors, as you see at the bottom there, get magnified back through the whole system. And in terms of those errors getting magnified, you're also then magnifying the work to sort those errors out. And you're employing people in your supply chain, in all your businesses, we would advocate to sort some of those issues out. So, I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to give you a little bit more insight into sort of how it actually works.
Thank you. Am I coming through the speakers? I'm informed by the organisers that you actually get the packs 1 or 2 weeks after we actually present, so I will go through at some speed for a variety of reasons, one of which is I think we need a bit of energy at this time of the evening. So we've had, we looked at the US soap example, and that gives an example of the why. So I'm actually going to go through some of the hows of the demand-driven approach. I spent quite a lot of time reading about the demand-driven approach. If you do this and go onto the web, here is a warning. There is a lot of management speak around this subject, around the core message. To be quite honest, I read some of this stuff and I sometimes think I'm going to sink in a syllable soup in terms of there's just endless streams of management expressions. So what I want to do in the next few slides is just go through this little, here are some key points, which is why it's worth considering this particular approach. What is it? What is demand-driven? It's an operating model based around flow. Keyword is flow. And the intention is actually to get the rhythm of the materials and the goods moving in line with actual demand. Really, really simple concept here. Now, one specific point, about a year ago, I was working and somebody said, we're going to move away from forecast-driven. To use one of my favorite lawyers' expressions, that's complete pants. You still need forecast, but the forecast will move towards being a projected range as opposed to point-specific. So that will start to come out, is that you actually start loosening in terms of the accuracy, because what you actually want is approximately right, not exactly wrong. Flow operating model, that is the main thing that this is about, demand-driven. I'm going to go through some of the mechanics of it. So to pick up, what's the starting point? It's the instability in the system. We've seen that in the US soap example, and that is partly due to the actual disconnect with actual demand. So demand-driven actually seeks to tackle this in two really quite simple ways. The first one is actually to put buffers into the production system. And putting buffers in is like putting shock absorbers in your car in terms of it actually dampens the instability within the production system. And those buffers are then actually replenished because they're connected to actual demand. Two very simple mechanisms. Now, I've got to get a little bit more into detail about what these actual buffers mean. If you go into demand-driven material, you'll see this red, yellow, green, all over the place. The first time I saw it, visually, I completely misinterpreted it. So I'll now interpret it in terms of the way it's actually meant to be looked at. The yellow is a volume. That is the volume of inventory. You are doing this every day, which is, that's your run rate volume, your average consumption over the lead time period. no-brainer. The red is the variability volume, which in demand-driven looks both ways. In terms of it looks towards the actual supply and also the demand side. So there's a slight twist there. And the green volume is actually just a statement that says, when I actually place a replenishment order, that's the volume I'm actually going to order. And it's that simple. But there's a few things which you can actually pick up from this straight away. First off, if you go and actually check your, and this is happening, if you actually go and check your inventory and it's somewhere above that green volume, which is the sum of those three volumes, you know you're out of control. You're overstocked. So you instantly know. If somebody comes along and actually says you're overstocked and you're in that position, yes, you've got to agree. But if you come down to the red arrow and somebody says you're actually overstocked and your stock is within that yellow volume, it's a red plus sum, then you are actually not overstocked because you've got stock which is actually in agreement with the amount that you said you would have to support marketing activity. So you're starting to get some management tools coming out here. The last point on this slide here is the top of yellow trigger point. Top of yellow, demand-driven terminology, hope I don't fall over, which just is the sum of the red and the yellow amounts. But that's an important one for replenishment. So let's bring that inventory forward. Change the colours very slightly there. So there's the buffer. So to be absolutely clear, you do actually have to do a forecast. Let's assume it's statistics at this point. I'll come back to them in one moment. And you actually look at the average, your X bar, and you put in the variability, and that's going to give you your yellow and your red. And of course, you've actually got to decide what your replenishment volume is going to be. Then you start business. So this is your fulfillment and replenishment cycle. You actually fulfill sales orders from that physical inventory buffer. As it depletes, you have a mechanism which actually says, now replenish it with further production. Nothing too challenging there. But every month or so, periodically, you need to do a review and actually say, do we actually want to change what those values are? Because obviously there's seasonality and all other sorts of effects. So you've got two mechanisms going on here in terms of two feedback loops. Stability, change it, let's say every month, and then you've actually got something which is connected to the market. Now, the more I looked at this, and there's some really simple mechanisms here, and I want to draw those out because it's so simple, but very, very valuable. So if we look at the, so I can use this here, the two arrows on the right-hand side, that actually is a control signal. It's a replenishment control signal, and it's called the net flow equation. So let me just go through a little bit about this. So first, we've got to compute it. Then you've actually got to use it. You compare it. It will then give you a replenishment signal. Then you've actually got to prioritize your production. How does that work? The first thing is the net flow. From where I'm standing, that looks slightly out of focus. I'm sure you can read it when you get the pack. There's three things. What inventory have I got? Easy to count. What's coming in? But the last one is actually as you take away the firm orders. So this is actually connected to the future view of the sales market. And that's the last box of actually is take away the firm orders, actually takes this figure and links it to the future market. The next thing you do is says, I've got my inventory buffer. I want to compare it. If I bring forward from the earlier slide, there's the top of yellow level. You actually compare what you've got, which is your net flow. Is it below that top of yellow? If yes, you actually want to do replenishment. It says raise replenishment signal. Now, this is a nice, easy look thing. This is one SKU. But the reality is you've got lots of SKUs. So you can look at the buffers of each of the SKUs and actually look at the ones and say which ones are we in deepest doo-doo. In other words, it says these are the ones where we're closest to the red. That is now your priority for saying as these are the ones we need to actually replenish. This is where our production. So a very simple mechanism has an elegance of actually when you actually look at the buffers across multiple SKUs, it gives you a production prioritization. It's an effective operations management tool. So as I say here, it's very simple, but it's really quite elegant in terms of linking the market, actual sales, to the production priority. Now, up to this point, I've tended to talk about the buffers as if they're finished goods buffers. You can put buffers, inventory buffers, into the production supply chain at different points. And in so doing, what you're actually doing is you're actually sectioning, you're putting controlled sections into the supply chain. By doing that, you bring more stability. By gaining more stability, you actually do less expediting. And if you're doing less expediting, you've got more stable production. This starts to become a very positive feedback loop. And on the bottom left-hand side here, just in the text here, there's a philosophical difference. When I first came across this, I was thinking, hang on a minute, lean, 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 lean. Lean is drive out inventory. But there's a philosophical difference which I think is worth noting within the demand-driven approach. Inventory is an asset if it helps you make the sale, or it actually helps you reduce lead time. So there's actually a philosophical difference in terms of you've got to flip. So actually, inventory is an asset if it's helping you make the sale. Where do we go from here? Ah, yes. Eventually, you have to talk to sales and marketing, which is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because it's the role of market mediation, operations talking to sales and marketing, the exercise of actually managing supply and demand. Now, once again, if I go back to the material that you'll find on the web, most of the material on the web, it actually focuses upon that long run, such as the US soap bar that we started the presentation with. That's fine. It's perfectly correct. But what we're finding is, and what we're developing is how do you actually take demand-driven into an environment where you haven't got that demand profile? And secondly, what is an appropriate language for talking to the marketing people? I spoke to one of my ex-colleagues recently, moved into a telecoms company last week, and he was saying to me, this is the biggest issue, which is we understand demand-driven, but how do we actually get a language which helps us to explain it to the people in marketing? So what we've done is we pulled together some demand profiles. And there they are, at last. Some typical ones, I'm sure we have found that these cover most situations. Top left is the flat run, that's the soap bar. One below is the one that we all hope for, which is the trend going upwards. I didn't put in the trend going downwards, please excuse me. And then at the bottom, super session, the grey and the yellow, you're going from one product to the other. On the right-hand side there, very short one activities such as the, where's my magic marker here, the peak and long tail. I've done a lot of work in mobile phones, and every phone launch is like that. In actual fact, it's actually more like that. I've actually seen an Apple phone launch where I worked it out, 1.5 Wembley stadiums of phones went out. And that particular company launched Apple phones, and they didn't do any other shipments for 10 days. It has such an immense activity. So mobile phone is a good example. If we go down to this one here, the movable peak, did some work recently with an agricultural chemical company. They know it's going to happen. They just do not know when the sun's going to come out and when exactly that's going to happen. So here we've got a starting point saying is you can look at your business, you can actually say, okay, we can use that information. So the first thing to do is actually adopt them. Okay, let's start going down that particular approach. It's not just a nice diagram. The next thing we can do is we can go through our SKU portfolio and actually start allocating these SKUs to these particular profiles. I would mention it's very unlikely that you would use all 11 of them. It was probably 6 or 7, I would guess. And another point is, of course, if you do it 3 months later, some of the SKUs might have moved from one profile to another, depending upon the point in the product life. So that's one activity. Now here comes the interesting part, because what you can actually do for each of those profiles is actually say is we only need a certain set of market data. So we've now got a language of what data we want from the marketing people. So the red line is illustrative of a summer peak, seeing that summer in the middle there. We can actually say, this is the information we actually want from those marketing people. So we've now got a statement of, tell us this information, and we don't want other information. I realise there's a lot of X's there, but it is actually starting to actually indicate this is what we need to go to the marketing people and actually say. So that's the what. That's the what data. When do we want it? This is the promotion profile which I pulled out here. And got various edge points. Edge points in the sense of the demand is on the edge of going from one situation to another situation. And there's 3 vertical bars here are illustrating that there's 3 critical times in terms of when, in terms of promotion. The first one, which is the seeding. The second one in the middle there is saying is, are you on the cusp of actually going up or down? Again, in mobile phones, that's a very hard one to get right. And then afterwards, the third one is after the actual peak. You've got the dip, and then what are you going to do to manage that? So there may well be situations where for a particular SKU, you're actually saying it's easy, it's easy, it's easy, and then actually we've got to really tightly manage this. So this is actually saying is you're starting to change the way, when you actually interact with your sales and marketing. And this is a diagram which I have no intention of going through in any great detail. It's a 2x2, but basically actually saying is you are going to be talking to sales and marketing on a monthly basis, and you are going to be talking to sales and marketing on a weekly basis, and you will start to rebalance some of those activities. And in my very brusque way of language, if I do delve into one detail there, monthly question, I've got a long run skew. Long range, I used to work on long range weather forecast, that takes me back, sorry. If I've got a long run skew, then is there any change expected? No, move on. Just keep it that simple. You don't actually have to go to your salespeople and actually say, I need a week-by-week forecast of this. Is it going to continue? Is it going to go up and down a little bit? It's a 5-minute conversation. Keep it simple. Meanwhile, if you've got something where it's very tight on a promotion, you might want weekly, and again, if I go out to the Apple phone launches, it's twice daily, you can have a very tight, but for very few SKUs, interaction with your sales and marketing colleagues. Okay. How are we doing on time?
I think we'll skip the project management bit, I think, and then we'll allow some time for questions.
Okay. So there's one, I'll do one point on the project management, and then we'll go to the questions. We are working with a software company. Software company is called Orchestrate. And what we have found is there's two things. First of all, why do you want our software? Because it's a huge portfolio of SKUs, so you need some software to help you actually manage the complexity and the size of your portfolio. But the second reason that the benefit of using Orchestrate is that we have found that the software they have helps our clients actually manage each of those demand profiles. So we've actually gone through them, and it took us 2 hours in the most recent outing to actually just go through the demand profiles and say, this is how you do it in the software. I thought it was going to take like sort of 2 weeks to get this over, but we did it in 2 hours. Tick, tick, tick. It's saying, this is how you're doing this is how you put the data in, these are the reports. So we found the software which actually supports this particular approach. So in terms of project management, first of all, you've got to actually get that software set up. Now we're moving into, they've got used to the software, we're now moving into the phase with that particular client of actually looking at the, how do you actually change the interaction with the sales and marketing people. And as I slowly die away, I passed the wand to my colleague Keith.
Thank you very much, David. Excellent. Let's just flick through these couple of slides. Just so Orchestrate is what David was talking about there, which we're partnering with in terms of project delivery. You will get these slides, but David and I felt in terms of the time that rather than talk to you about project management, we'll concentrate on the why and the how and allow you to ask some questions, really. So just in summary, David talked there about the shock absorber. We've tried to introduce some concepts. As I say, do look at the Demand Driven Institute website as an independent methodological view of what demand driven is all about. There's some very good material on there and also some very good case studies. And this is experience that has been built up over 10 years. So that's why I started off in terms of the opportunity is out there. I operated in my supply chain background in a forecast-driven business. Forecasts are always wrong. And when you do that, and when you look at some of that Demand-Driven Institute stuff, you will see lots of examples of that. But unfortunately, that's the way supply chain processes and ERP systems work. They work by being driven by a forecast. And you're then doing huge numbers of corrections around that forecast. So what demand, as David said, the buffer concept is a very important concept that actually changes that around. And there are, and this is a very recent example, there was a webinar recently with BT, and we've worked a little bit with BT and Orchestrate have too, where these are the sort of savings. So from a commercial viewpoint, the money is coming from inventory. Don't underestimate the stability benefits that there are from introducing these concepts and these processes. So just by getting stability back into your manufacturing systems, stability back into your replenishment systems through the supply chain will give you not maybe the sterling savings, but will certainly give you benefits within your business and how you manage the supply chain. So I think what we've got about another, well, less than 10 minutes now, but we thought we'd like to sort of open it up just for you to ask us some questions. Here it's very much one way. So we've got a few minutes now before the closure if anybody would like to ask us anything about demand driven.